Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Mind and Deen podcast with Hannah and Aisha.
So in episode 4 we spoke about what anxiety is and how it presents, and today in episode 5 we were talking about how to manage this anxiety.
Mm-hmm. If you hear any background noise, it's the fan because it's quite hot today.
Very hot day.
So this is just a reminder that anxiety is normal. Everyone experiences anxiety in their life. It's a very natural response. And if you have anxiety and you worry about the future or the uncertainty of it, it doesn't mean that your connection with God is weak or that you're a bad Muslim. And having an anxiety disorder isn't your fault. It comes from different places like we spoke about last time, and it's not something that's easily controlled, but there's always stuff that you can do to help manage it.
So a quote that I wanted to read from Surah Al-Anfal: "But they plan and Allah plans, and Allah is the best of planners."
Okay, so we're gonna go into different ways of coping with anxiety. And the first one is the worry diary. So what is the worry diary, Aisha?
So I think the worry diary is just a really good way to kind of keep a track of your worries and to kind of identify what worries you're having. So you might kind of notice that you have certain worries or you worry at a certain time in the day. So there might be like a pattern where you worry more at nighttime. And I think that's why we spoke about last time how anxiety can be linked to like sleep difficulties.
Yeah.
Where you might be struggling to sleep because of all those worries. So just kind of, keeping a track of those worries on your phone or a little notebook can sometimes be really helpful. So another aspect of that I ask clients to do is kind of using a worry tree to identify the types of worries that they have.
Yeah, so that can be hypothetical worries and practical worries.
So hypothetical worries are worries that are often future-based. So they kind of start with the term like, what if?
Okay.
Like, what if?
So different scenarios that you kind of think of.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that you might worry about, but it's kind of based in the future and you can't predict it. You can't control what will happen. Like, oh, what if I lose my job next month? Like, you don't know if that's going to happen.
Yeah.
So that's why it feels very overwhelming and very intense. But then you also have the practical everyday worries. So those are worries that you can kind of essentially problem solve in the moment and do something about.
Okay.
So you have control over those ones.
Okay. So in a nutshell, hypothetical worries are in the future and stuff that you have a lack of control over.
Yeah.
And practical worries, you can do something about it and deal with it in the moment.
Yes, exactly. And because there are two types of worries, there are two different ways to deal with them as well.
Mm-hmm.
So for hypothetical worries, the main technique to use for that is worry time. So with worry time, essentially what you're doing is you're setting aside time in the day to worry. Like, it sounds so strange and funny, but what you're trying to do is you're trying to take that control back. So instead of the worries controlling you and coming to your mind throughout the day constantly, you're kind of acknowledging the worry but kind of setting it aside for that time.
Okay. Is there like a limited time that you give?
For worry time?
5 minutes, 10 minutes?
Yeah, so we say no more than 20.
Okay.
It can be 5, 10 if you feel like there isn't much to worry about on that certain day. I think it depends on the day.
Mm-hmm.
But and it shouldn't be too close to bedtime as well. Obviously, you don't want to be thinking about all those worries in worry time just before bed. Yeah. So kind of making sure you have that time before you go to sleep. And
can this be combined with like the worry diary?
Yeah.
So is that something?
Yeah. So keeping the worry diary throughout the day and then making a note, like maybe highlighting the hypothetical ones because those are the ones you're going to think about in worry time later.
Okay.
So can definitely be used hand in hand.
Okay. And practical worries are worries that we can do something about.
For example, I have an interview, tomorrow. I'm worried that it's not going to go well. I haven't practiced anything. So obviously the best solution and plan would be to kind of practice and make a script or to kind of help yourself manage that worry a bit better. Yeah.
So I think the question you ask is, can I do something about this worry at this time? And then it's either yes or no. So if it's yes, then you kind of make a plan on how to address it. So like you said, you could practice more, be more prepared. And if it's a no, then we try and let it go.
Yeah, exactly. So you let it go through the worry time. So at the end of the worry time, essentially what you want to help yourself understand is that this worry you can't do much about. You can't control it, you can't change it. So the best thing to do is, let it go. You've thought about it for 20 minutes. You've given it that time and attention, but now you need to let it go and move forward.
Yeah. And why this is a tree is because we have this yes or no for each step, and it helps us decide. And then it kind of forms like a pine tree.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for kids, you kind of draw out that pine tree to help them. So you start at the top with the main worry, and then it branches out to yes or no, and kind of help them navigate through that. So another thing that's very common for people who experience anxiety is to avoid the situation or the thing that kind of triggers their anxiety.
Yeah.
And what we know avoidance does is kind of keeps that anxiety cycle maintained. So it seems like a good plan in the beginning, like why would you want to stress yourself out? Why would you want to put yourself in that situation? But what that does is it keeps the anxious thoughts coming again if something similar happens, and you don't really face your fear.
Yeah.
So what we do is when we work with clients, we help them face their fear by actually facing the worry situation or the anxious situation.
Yeah, rather than avoiding it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this can be quite difficult, especially depending on your level of anxiety. So, for example, if your biggest fear is, I don't know, a common one for young people is raising their hand in class, or you could have a more common one like getting on a plane. Yeah, that's one a lot of people have. So that would be the biggest thing to work on. That would be your last step on like a step-by-step plan. So what we do is we break that into smaller steps, and then we kind of start from the easiest thing, so something that gives you less anxiety. So that would be maybe watching a video of a plane, or depending on how anxious you are, and then kind of working your way up that ladder to eventually get in the plane and sit throughout a journey and be able to control your nerves at that time. And what we do is we kind of rate each step. So if we're breaking it down, so the video would probably be like a 2 on 10 anxiety, and then being on the plane would give you like a 10 on 10 anxiety. And then once you complete each step, you have to reward yourself, and based on how anxious you feel is the reward. So it has to be like, you can't have a huge reward for the first step, because then you won't have anything to work towards.
Gradually exposing yourself
to
the anxiety.
And it does take time, and sometimes you can kind of go back a step, or you have to break a step even further. But it's a very good way to, once you like actually face the biggest fear, I think it's very helpful. Have you done this?
Graded exposure? Yeah, have done it. So I had a client who was anxious about driving, and I think it was to work specifically. So it was just about, kind of obviously not telling him to get in the car straight away, but working his way up, and kind of maybe increasing the distance of the journey, of how long he spends in the car, for example.
Yeah, and it's whatever works for each person. So my steps might look different to yours, and yours to another person.
I feel like they are very individual when it comes to that. Another
thing that we do when we expose ourselves for each step is use the anxiety graph. So what we spoke about last time in the last episode is how anxiety is like a roller coaster. It goes up, and then it has to come down. Like it will come down. It will come down. So what we do is that we give like a graph, and they have to rate how anxious they feel throughout the exposure. So at the beginning it might be like a 10, and then later down, if they're exposing themselves for like 10 minutes, at the end of 10 minutes it might be like a 5 or a 2 or whatever. So that just gives you an idea that anxiety does come down. So if something gets in the way of your step-by-step plan, or anything else that's more practical worries, like I think a common one for young people is not being able to do their exposure in time, maybe because their parents are working or not being able to find the time, something like that, then we usually use problem solving. So this sounds very like it's a common thing, problem solving, but we use it a bit more elaborately. So there's a whole like step to this. So what we do is we focus on the main problem, what the main problem is, and then we list down a bunch of solutions. So it can be, we can start with like the craziest solution. So a lot of things, a common thing that young people say is, I don't want homework, or I don't know, I want a pony or something like that.
Yeah.
So you can be as creative as you want, and then you list like the pros and cons of each solution, and you kind of pick a solution and try and see if it works out. It's a bit long, it's a tedious process, but if there's like a big problem that's stopping you from doing certain things, then this is something that you can use, and people have said it's useful.
So another technique that can be helpful to manage anxiety is refocusing your attention on the present moment and deep breathing. Deep breathing can be really helpful to reduce your heart rate. It can reduce stress as well, as you're kind of increasing the oxygen flow to your blood. It also kind of improves muscle function, like during exercise, and that can kind of prevent strain.
So this is like a healthy coping mechanism.
Yeah.
So last time technique. We spoke about unhelpful and helpful coping.
Yeah. So this is a
helpful
one.
Healthy,
yeah, healthy, good. So one example of deep breathing is diaphragmatic belly breathing. Don't know if you've heard of that before, Hannah.
No.
So what we don't notice is that when we're taking breaths,
Yeah.
we're taking the breaths from our chest.
Okay.
So you might notice when you're breathing, your chest is just rising and falling. But essentially what we should be doing is taking breaths from the stomach. So a lot deeper down, but we don't do it. We're kind of taking shallow breaths throughout the day, but we should be taking deeper ones. So there is like a video on YouTube that I send to my clients to kind of explain the technique a bit better, because it can be really hard to get the hang of.
Yeah.
And we're not kind of saying do belly breathing all the time.
Yeah,
but it's just about
being more mindful of times when you can.
Exactly. Or just setting aside time to kind of just do that belly breathing, where you kind of just place one hand on your stomach, one on your chest, and you want to kind of make sure that the one on your stomach is the one that's rising and falling.
Okay.
So you know that you're taking the breaths properly. Another breathing exercise which is nice is the 5 4 3 2 1. So it's a grounding technique.
Oh yeah.
And essentially, and essentially what grounding is just trying to kind of engage with your senses to really bring you back to the here and now. Because often when we worry or when we're feeling anxious, all our attention is on our thoughts. Yeah. That's why we're feeling the way we do. That's why we have those physical symptoms. So if we just focus the attention on something else, like how it feels sitting in that chair, how hot the room feels, what you can hear, what you can see, just really engaging with your senses, that can be really helpful, like a really good distraction. 5
things you can see, 4 things you can touch, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste.
Yeah. And it's a really nice one. I feel like you can do it wherever you are, outside, at home, just before bed.
It's like a cheat code, like a distraction.
Yeah. You can also kind of make some lifestyle changes as well, like kind of slowly improving and doing more exercise throughout the day, kind of gradually increasing it to whatever feels manageable, but also kind of making diet changes as well.
I think with exercise, the thing is, it brings up a lot of the same physiological responses as anxiety. So your heart rate goes up, you get a bit sweaty, and for people who suffer from panic disorder, it's like a thing that they do. They make them run on a treadmill, and by doing that, your heart rate goes up, you get sweaty, and the idea behind that is that you have control over those symptoms, so you can make them come up and you can make them go away. Because with panic, it's like extreme versions of like heart rate increasing and extreme anxiety symptoms, and in your head you don't have any control over it, but in reality you do. So that exercise kind of makes you understand that you have control over different symptoms and different physiological responses which I think is quite interesting.
Yeah, so when you're on the treadmill, you start
Yeah.
sweating, your heart's racing, but you know that it's because you're on the treadmill
Yeah.
that you're feeling that way. And it's,
Yeah, so it's
The
not only
symptoms.
the anxiety that gives you these symptoms, but
Yeah.
you have control over what you can bring up, and it goes away, right? So if
Yeah.
you stop using the treadmill, kind of calms down.
Good. Yeah,
With
exactly.
breathing, it calms down, and a lot of people avoid doing exercises or going on treadmills or doing different activities because they think it might bring up these symptoms.
Yeah, that's actually a really good thing to do, like to practice
Yeah.
if you have panic
Yeah.
or anxiety attacks. And then, like I said, making changes to your diet as well, so kind of reducing caffeine and sugar intake, because high levels of caffeine and sugar kind of can increase your heart rate. You can get like a sugar rush, and that can kind of mimic those symptoms of anxiety that we mentioned.
Yeah.
And then obviously afterwards you kind of have like a dip in your mood as well when the caffeine wears off.
Kind of instant relief.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That short-term relief, but then in the long run, not much.
So this would be like an unhelpful habit.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's something that you can probably cut out of your diet or
Okay.
reduce on those days where you're feeling a bit anxious.
I think with anxiety and kind of any mental health problem, it's very important to have like a holistic outlook to it. So it's not just looking after your mental health, but physical health as well, and spirituality.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what Islam says. Like, Islam has a very holistic approach to things, and even with what Islam teaches us on how to deal with anxiety, it's very similar as well.
So just another quote that I wanted to read. So, verily in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. So kind of by making sure that you regularly engage in acts of remembrance, you can kind of just be more mindful, more grateful.
Mm-hmm.
And that can help us to kind of be more resilient to face those challenges and struggles of life. Seeking refuge in prayer as well. So salah is a good way to manage the anxiety. So another quote from Surah Al-Baqarah: seek help through patience and prayer. So patience is a virtue that is emphasized throughout the Quran, and it involves kind of, being in control of your emotions, having trust in Allah's wisdom and plan, and it kind of empowers us to kind of endure those hardships, with the knowledge that every difficulty that we kind of go through has its purpose and will pass. But also prayer, it's an act of worship. In Islam, it's a direct means of communication with Allah, where we kind of seek His guidance, His support, and essentially just trying to kind of help us to maintain and practice that patience and that trust in Allah and His divine plan. So yeah, it just kind of helps us to really reinforce that connection with God, but also to remind us that we are never alone in our struggles.
Yeah, and I think this is important because the act of prayer encompasses many different things.
Yeah.
So you have like the physical aspect of it, where you're kind of grounding yourself in the moment. You're being more mindful. You're moving your muscles in a manner that increases blood flow and kind of gets you to feel a bit more relaxed physiologically. And then you're seeking that comfort in knowing that you're communicating with your Lord, and that you have someone to put all your worry, like it's like worry time, but you're like a worry diary, but you have that designated time for it.
Reciting relevant verses and du'as from the Quran can also be quite helpful to manage anxiety. So in times of distress, turning to those verses can kind of bring peace and calmness to the mind and soul. So one verse from the Quran that emphasizes the importance of remembering God for that improved mental health is from Surah Ar-Ra'd. So those who have believed and whose hearts are assured by the remembrance of Allah, unquestionably by the remembrance of Allah, hearts are assured.
Okay, these are really good quotes, and we can put them up on our page so you can refer to them again.
And again, just like we've mentioned, practicing patience and gratitude is also emphasized in Islam. So in Surah Al-Baqarah it says, Allah does not burden a soul beyond that it can bear. And I think that's one of my favorite quotes.
Yeah, I think I have a necklace that says that.
Do you?
Yeah.
Ah, nice. And I guess it's just telling us that, you know, Allah is aware of our capabilities and our limitations. So he knows our strengths, our weaknesses, our resilience. So during those times of difficulty, it's natural for us as humans to feel overwhelmed, to kind of feel like, you know, these burdens are too heavy to endure. But this verse just reminds us that Allah will only test us with what we're capable of handling. And this kind of encourages us to kind of focus our perspective on, you know, from despair to one of hope in God, and his wisdom. So eventually, we kind of just hope to realize that these trials we face are not meant to break us, but to kind of strengthen us. And to help us to be more resilient and to elevate our spiritual growth. Yeah,
and I think these are quotes that we can go to, especially now when the world is going through so much, and individually and as like a community. Like I mentioned earlier, Islam has a very holistic outlook to things. So we know that the Prophet, peace be upon him, he used to say that it's not only enough to pray and make dua, but when you have ailments that require treatment, then you should go seek treatment for it. So if you have, like for anxiety disorder, you have people that take medication, and for other health related issues as well. So you have to look after both your deen and your body.
Like it's important to rely on prayer and to be patient, like we mentioned, but it's also okay to kind of seek out that help and speak to people and share your feelings with others.
And I think there's a hadith that says the Prophet mentioned that there are no ailments that are sent down without any treatment. So that can be either like medical, that can be spiritual.
And I think it's important to seek support from trusted individuals, and if you do kind of feel like you need to get help, important to kind of see a GP if you feel like the anxiety is affecting your day-to-day life or causing you a lot of distress, and your GP will kind of just ask more about your symptoms and your worries, your fears, you know, your emotions as well, to kind of find out if you do have generalized anxiety disorder that we spoke about in more detail in the last episode.
There are many sources actually where you could reach out for help, either that could be through text, to phone call, seeing in person, online, so many different links, and we can put them up on our page. Reach out to us if you need any support with that.
So thank you for listening to today's episode. Thanks for tuning in, guys.
Hope you find these beneficial. It's been fun making them.
Would be nice to know if anyone, you know, tried out these techniques that we've spoken about. Or if you have any other techniques that you use to manage your anxiety. But till next time.
Bye.
Bye.